Hello, and welcome to the How to Exit podcast, where we introduce you to a world of small to medium business acquisitions and mergers. We interview business owners, industry leaders, authors, mentors, and other influencers with the sole intent to share with you what it looks like to buy or sell a business. Let's get rolling. And now a moment for our sponsors. I want to highly recommend you get Acquisition Aficionado magazine. Every month, Acquisition Aficionado magazine brings you tactics for business buying and selling you won't find anywhere else. Learn firsthand from industry leaders who share their success stories, featuring in-depth interviews and stories from leading figures in the business acquisition industry. This multi-platform mobile magazine speaks to acquisition entrepreneurs wherever they are in the journey. And I want you to visit acquisitionaficionado.com today.
Hello and welcome to the How to Exit podcast. I'm your guest host, Roger Glovsky. Today we're diving deep into the often overlooked human element behind building, scaling, and exiting businesses. Our guest today is Callum Laing, a serial entrepreneur, investor, author, and business innovator. Callum is also founder of the Veblen Director Program and a community of global investment leaders called Guild. His primary focus is M&A, which he does through the Unity Group, and he's been involved in over 100 M&A deals, and he's the author of 4 best-selling books: Progressive Partnerships, Agglomerate, Entrepreneurial Investing, and Boardroom Blueprint. One common thread across all of his work is his extraordinary insight into the psychology and motivations of entrepreneurs and investors. With that, Callum, welcome to How to Exit.
Thanks, Roger. Looking forward to the chat.
All right, well, let's get right to it. To start, would you explain what the Veblen Director Program is and what is the Guild member?
Sure. Well, let me give you a bit of context. You mentioned that sort of my core business is doing mergers and acquisitions, and so myself and my business partner Jeremy have been doing that for about 10 years now. And I think when you're doing the volume of transactions that we've done, so as you mentioned, well over 100 deals, you start seeing problems and challenges and opportunities, because we're entrepreneurs, we see them as opportunities. One of the things that I saw was there's a lot of people on boards that were not necessarily on them for the right reasons, or they were very much on them for their own reasons rather than representing all the stakeholders. And I also saw that a lot of very talented people weren't ever getting the opportunity to sit on boards because they were the wrong gender, they didn't look the right way, they hadn't gone to the right schools, they weren't connected to the right people. Yet they were hugely talented and much more committed to the success of all stakeholders. And so one of the things that I was kind of lucky enough because of the M&A, I ended up on lots of boards, and I started to see some of the sort of ways that you can get in, some of the inside tricks to get into a board and how to affect change. And so I set up the Veblen Director Program to help leaders to basically get their first board seat, because that's part of the problem. Is it's a little bit like at the beginning of your career, nobody will give you a board seat unless you've already got a board seat. And so I set up Veblen Director Program to help people get their first board seats, and we've now got well over 250 people sitting on, I think, 350, 400 boards around the world, and it's great. It's an amazing community. And so that's its own separate business. It's got its own team. It runs. It's very effective. Obviously, some of those companies then want to go public or work with my other business. So that's a great value add. But the other thing that we noticed was when you start putting people on boards, one of our it's not enough just to sit on the board. I mean, that's great for status and prestige, and yeah, it can be quite lucrative. But ideally you want to be a great board member. You want to add real value. And when you ask companies what's the real value that they want from their board members, a lot of companies are trying to raise capital. And what we were hearing back from our members was like, I don't know anything about raising capital, but this company needs to raise some money. And so I've been raising capital for 15 years. Mostly it's a very painful, excruciatingly painful, frustrating task. But in recent years, it sort of flipped the model on its head a bit and started to have quite a lot of success raising capital. And so I put together uh, a whole lot of content around how to raise capital, but kind of working back to front, starting with what investors want and then working back to creating the investment vehicle for them. And that's, as you mentioned, we've now got a great community. There's around 500 people in that community, all building their own networks of investors, learning how to raise capital, sharing deals. And so it was originally kind of to solve a problem for the Veblen Director Program members, but it's taken on its own entity and its own life as well. So yeah, that's kind of those two communities.
So you started out as an entrepreneur, but one of the things that you recognized along the way is the value of having a board of directors or participating in other board of directors. So
Yeah.
Veblen sort of adds that component to building businesses. And the other is developing relationships with investors and having an investor network, and Guild really fills in that piece. So those are two main pieces. Would you say that they're often missed by entrepreneurs in growing their businesses?
Yeah, and I think again, taking it back to the topic of this podcast, which is how to exit. Oftentimes when founders reach that point when they want to exit, and it's normally because they've reached a point of frustration, and they maybe start talking to buyers. You have to think about it from a buyer's perspective. Buyers are looking, they're not going to buy anything unless they trust you, and so building relationships before you ask for something is really, really important. But they also want to know that the business is an ongoing entity even without you, and a board is something that serves that purpose. So I think people, often entrepreneurs, are quite sort of, they have a negative perception of boards because the sort of the public perception of boards is that they're there to stop you doing the fun stuff. So I think the way I explain it to Veblen members is, if you're an entrepreneur, you build your business by taking risks and trying new things, and most things fail and some things succeed, and you build it up, but the whole thing is held together with chicken wire and masking tape. It's like it's incredibly difficult to build a successful business. And eventually you get to a point where you want to step down from the day-to-day running of the company. And now you need to trust your baby to someone else. And that's very scary, because if that someone else uses their initiative and does something wrong, it could destroy 20 years hard work. And so that's kind of where the idea of boards came from, which is like, okay, I put a CEO in place, but I want some sanity checks. I just want to make sure that they don't do anything really crazy and destroy everything that we've built up to this point. And so that's kind of the idea that people think about in terms of boards, which is they're there for good governance. They're there to prevent anything too crazy happening. And that's fine. And at a big company level, that's generally what they're there for. What we tend to focus on with Veblen Director Program is at the beginning of the journey. And it's about being a board that is supportive. How do you help the company grow? How do you use your contacts to help the company grow? How do you do introductions? How do you become an advocate? All of those things. Where it's important from an acquisition point of view is that if I'm looking to buy your company, if you are the only senior executive, if you're the CEO, the founder, you carry all the cards, despite the fact you told me you hardly work in the business, which is what every entrepreneur says, but we all know it's not true. Um, I know that if you get hit by a bus, that business is probably in trouble. Whereas if there's a board of directors in place, I feel like there's more continuity. There's some people there that have responsibility for the ongoing process of the business, and that makes the company more valuable because it has that continuity.
So there's a level of maturity in building a business where it goes beyond the entrepreneur, the founding team. You have an outside board. It starts to have more of an institutional, or at least more of a duration beyond the life and the career of the management team. So that's an important part of the process. I want to focus a little bit on the trust element and really the human psychology that's involved, because I think in your most recent LinkedIn post, which really resonated with me, my career really started out as a trusted business advisor. So in your post, you said the most valuable investment that you can make is building trusted networks. And can you expand on that? Why is trust in general so fundamental when doing business? And what do you mean by trusted networks?
Yeah. So look, business is everything in business is trust. Uh, there's what's the slogan on the back of the dollar note? In God we trust, or something. Everything is about trust, and one of the things you notice is the more people trust you, the faster the whole process goes. And so, for example, one of the things we talk about in Veblen Director Program is building your profile. When I was a young entrepreneur and I would go and have meetings with successful entrepreneurs, if I was lucky enough to convince them to meet me for a coffee, I then had to spend the first 20 minutes of that meeting selling myself, convincing them that I was serious, that this is what that it was worth their time to have a conversation with me. That's hard work. What you do when you build your profile in public is people start to trust you already because they start to hear your thoughts, your values, what you stand for, how you deliver value. And so when you meet them for the first time, they already know that they can trust you on a certain element. And so what happens is if you, for example, you read that blog post, suppose you didn't know me, you say, right, okay, this aligns with my values. This is someone I want to do business with. I notice he has a product, or I want to take my company public. We can get straight into the logistics of, is this a good deal for me and you to be doing, rather than spending time on, are you the right person to be doing this deal? And so trust is really about increasing. The more trust there is, the more velocity you get in business, and the more velocity, the faster everything goes, which is a key point. So I can't remember which book I talk about this, but one of my first kind of realizations on this was, when you're a young entrepreneur, it's very difficult to build trust because you're young and green and you've got no idea what you're doing. Um, but you can leverage off other people's trust. And so the first time I realized this was when I was trying to raise capital for my business. As a young entrepreneur, it's very difficult to raise capital. When I put a board of directors in, I could leverage off their reputations. I could leverage off the companies that they were working with. So I had somebody from Google. So I could say, I have someone from Google on my board. That's incredibly valuable, and it's a shortcut to an investor that, okay, this is not just some kid with an idea. There's some kid with an idea that's got some kind of tacit support from somebody that's smart enough to be working at Google. And so it's this idea of leveraging on uh, trust, and leveraging on other people's trust where possible. A board is a very small network. I'm a huge fan of creating communities. I think, ultimately, all the fun stuff in business happens when people come together and start doing things. And so, if I take Veblen Director Program, I mentioned we've got 250 plus people in that community. They're all sitting on boards. By definition, they're all ambitious, driven individuals. They're leveraging those board seats into other board seats. So that network becomes more and more valuable over time. And of course, now companies are coming to me saying, hey, how do we get in front of that network? We would like to pay to get our message in front of that network. So you can see a very tangible value proposition there as well. So yeah, look, I'm a big fan of building trusted networks just because it speeds things up.
And the two kind of work hand in hand. You build this trust that gets you onto a board, and by being on a board, it creates credibility that gives people
Exactly.
more trust in your experience and your knowledge. So it's part of building a career, part of building a business. One of the things you mentioned, particularly in progressive partnerships, is really how to leverage relationships and how to continually to uh, move up, if you will. And you have had a variety of different roles. One of the reasons I was excited about interviewing you was particularly because you've had the unique perspective of being an entrepreneur, being an investor, being building networks of people in a variety of different formats, being an innovator when it came to business models and knowing how to take companies public, and a variety of different roles where you had relationships with vendors, customers, investors, et cetera. So along the way, you've developed a broad range of tools and techniques that you use to develop the relationship, to develop the trust. How did you acquire that sort of range of sort of skills? Did it come naturally? Were you just good at sort of putting yourself in other people's shoes? Or was it skill that you sort of was hard won through a variety of, failed experiences?
Yeah, I think it's mainly lurching from one failure to another. um, the, I think one of the things that I've done throughout my career is try and go one step beyond. So if I'm trying to sell to a particular type of individual, then I want to figure out what are the problems that that individual has, because then I can articulate my solution in the best way to them. The thing with that is that as you do that, you start to learn more and more about that individual. You see more problems, and then you see other ways to solve problems for them, and so you create a new business around that. And so you kind of, if you track my career, a lot of it is solving one problem and then going and that gets you into the heart of a particular client avatar, and then you realize that actually they've got this problem as well. So then you're going, well, okay, I've already got a relationship with them, so why don't I try and solve this problem? So if you take well, if you take Unity Group, we had taking all these companies public. We wanted to find good people to sit on boards. Um, we were finding people that weren't good people, and so it just became easier to train people up, start with people with good values and leadership tendencies, and then train them up and put them in. And then the big thing that they needed most was that they wanted to learn how to raise capital, and so then you add that component to it. So I think a lot of it is just being open to trying to understand what are the challenges that people are facing, and kind of work backwards from that. And yeah, don't always get it right, but if you're not asking the question, you'll never get the answer.
Understanding other people's challenges is a real skill. Does it involve human psychology? Does it really just be about relating to people where you've had similar experiences? How do you do it?
So I think you've got to start with a genuine curiosity, and trying to understand what is the issue, or what is the blockage point. I mean, I make a point of surrounding myself with smart people. I think at the heart of Veblen, or the heart of Guild, is this idea that if you surround yourself with people that are already playing at a higher level, it elevates you. And so, if I can continue to attract great people into my communities, then it forces me to play at a higher game. And you see that, yeah, a lot of the stuff that you're trying to figure out yourself, somebody else has already figured out. But yeah, I think you just got to get curious, and I think also being being clear on who you want to work with, I think is the probably the most overlooked piece. So yeah, lots of people kind of parrot the advice of follow your passion, and I've never been a huge fan of follow your passion because the market doesn't give a shit what you're passionate about. Quite frankly, it only cares about what it needs, and so what I what I think is far more valuable is to say who are the people that you want to work with, and when you figure out who are the people that you want to work with, and then combine that with something that you have some innate talent at, then it becomes much more fun because I mean we can all think back, if you think back to when you were growing up and you had some of those really terrible minimum wage jobs, but actually some of your fondest memories are often from those jobs. Like the jobs themselves were terrible, but messing around with your mates doing the job was a bunch of fun. So it wasn't actually the job; it was the people that you're with. And so,
My first job was driving a truck, and we transported horses, and it was mucking out the stalls in the back of the trailer. It was not the nicest job, but we had a lot of fun doing it.
Exactly right. I mean, and look, I did I you remember those VHS cassette tapes? I worked in a factory taking the stickers off those from the ones that had been returned. Like that was as yeah, this hot factory in the summer listening to rubbish radio over and over again. But we had so much fun because it was all young, bored kids doing exactly the same thing. Now I don't want I've got my own two young bored kids, so I don't want to hang out with them. I want to work out. I want to hang out with driven, ambitious people that want to make a real impact in the world. And so, if you start by figuring out the avatar that you want to hang around with, and then look at the problems that they face, and it's quite possible they're similar problems to problems that you face yourself. Then I think that gives you a very good basis and not just to monetize how to solve that problem for them, but to come at it from a place of real empathy because you understand, yeah, you care about them because you want to spend time with them, and so you have that interest and that empathy in their challenges.
Well, I know that you also invest in companies really all over the world, and you've invested in companies in Colorado. So you might be familiar. Today was really the first day of Boulder Startup Week. I don't know if you're familiar with Startup Week, but the whole concept of startup communities, which really kind of reached around, grew, expanded to cities, towns, communities around the world, is this started here in Boulder. It was started by some of the co-founders of TechStars, if you're familiar with TechStars, and
Yep.
the founder, one of the co-founders, Brad Feld, he's a venture capitalist, and he's written some books that I think align with some of your thinking. So one of your concepts is to add value first. That in developing networks. He in developing what he called the Boulder thesis, which was how to build a startup community, how to really add value. They had this mantra of giving first, of giving before you take. And there's also Adam Grant, who wrote a book, Give and Take. That's very similar and very much aligned with your approach, which is before you expect returns, and in order to develop relationships, whether it's investors or others, there's an element to giving first. How does that work? Why does it work?
I, yeah, it's weird because it's such an inherent idea now. It surprises me when people still see it as kind of new or innovative. Uh, Look, I think it comes back to this idea of trust. And so if you go back to Cialdini's book on influence, and the law of reciprocity, that's one of those key things that if you give first, then people are that there's a social obligation for them to at least pay attention, and you can see it, at a very, very basic level when I talk to people about their LinkedIn strategy, for example, how you do it. So a lot of people will just go and try and connect to the people that they want to connect with on LinkedIn. Now, if you have any level of profile on LinkedIn, you get overwhelmed with connection requests. And so, like me, I ignore most connection requests because there's just too many of them come in. If somebody has commented on one of my posts 2 or 3 times, and so we've had a bit of a discussion on something, and then they connect with me, then even if I don't know them, even if they're not, necessarily a high profile connection that I'd be looking for, I'm more than likely to accept that connection because they've taken some time, they've done something first for me by building traction on my post, and so I mean that's a very, very small example. It's a very easy thing for people to do, but it makes a real difference. And I think again, it's just kind of this idea of the more trust there is, the more speed there is. And I think the bit that people get wrong is they often try and shortcut the process. And so, if you take the content that we talk about in Guild, the idea is that you try and build a relationship with an investor first. Figure out what it is that they're looking for. What's the problem that they're trying to solve? Is it capital appreciation? Is it yield that they're looking for? Are they looking for safety? Are they looking for risk? Are they looking for, do they want to learn? What are their objectives? Start with that and then go out and try and find deals that potentially match that, as opposed to what most people do when they are trying to raise capital, which is they say, right, I've invested a year of my time building this startup. Now I need to find an investor that wants this startup, which is kind of like looking for a needle in a haystack. And so if you then kind of take the if you take that through to sort of the pitching experience of raising capital, and this is where the media doesn't help. Things like Dragon's Den, or those pitching shows give the impression to young entrepreneurs that the way that you raise money is that you just have an amazing pitch. And in fact, if you kind of Google how do I raise money, everything comes out Silicon Valley. It's like, here's the Uber deck. So just repurpose the Uber deck. They raised billions, and then go and knock on 1,000 doors. What you do when you approach things like that is you're not trying to build relationships. You're just trying to be very transactional. You're just trying to hope that you find somebody that's waiting to write a check, and that doesn't exist in today's world. Like, nobody's going to write a check until they trust you. And so if you say to somebody, what you need to do is build a relationship with an investor, spend 3 months getting to know them, and then tell them what you're doing and building, and how you could add value to them. Most people won't want to do that because it takes 3 months time. They'd rather just spend that 3 months knocking on 1,000 doors. But actually, yeah, you end up saving time by building trust up front. And I think it's a difficult thing for people to get their head around. But if you can build those relationships ahead of time, if you can start to have, I think if you can start to think in terms of, when you meet someone, this person might not be valuable to me right now, but at some point in the next 20 years, they could be incredibly valuable to me. That's a much more useful strategy, and often comes back to you tenfold, because at some point down the line, there will be some opportunities to work together.
That's really a longer term view, isn't it? I mean, you're looking at over your lifetime, over a career, you've made actually a number of points. One is this long-term view that if you look at the, over your lifetime, you're developing these relationships and they come back to you over time. The other is that it's just easier. It's just rather than going out and pitching to 1,000 investors, hoping that they will like your company, it's easier to get to know and develop a relationship with the investor, understand what they're looking for, and mold what you're trying to build to fit them, or to find opportunities that would fit their criteria. So
Yeah.
it's just an easier flow.
Yeah, and look, the example I give in Guild, and it's a brilliant example from the court records of when Elon Musk was trying to get out of the Twitter sale, but it's screenshots of his text messages to Larry Ellison, and it was when he was looking to buy Twitter, and he sent a message to Larry Ellison, the head of Oracle, and said, "Hey, I'm looking to buy Twitter. Are you interested in participating?" And Larry said, "Sure. How much do you think?" And Elon said, "Yeah, 1 to 2 billion." And Larry says, "Sure, I'm in." And
Doesn't get
you
any
kind
easier
of
than that, right?
um, and but what's interesting is when that's shocking because the numbers are so big. But when I looked at kind of the last half a dozen investments that I had made, they were all followed a fairly similar pattern. It was people that I trusted had reached out to me and said, "Hey, I've just invested in this company. You should take a look," or the I can get you an allocation into this company I'm already in, and because I trusted them and because they were already involved, it was very easy for me to say yes. And you kind of contrast that with the idea that most people have, which is if I send my pitch on LinkedIn or a cold email, that the investor is just going to go, "Oh, you know what? I've got absolutely no investment ideas. I've got nothing going on in my inbox, but oh look, here's a brand new email from a person I don't know about a company in an industry I know nothing about, but it's a very compelling pitch. So let me write them a check. Where do I send this check now?"
It doesn't
It's
it
just
doesn't happen
nonsense.
that way. It has to be a friend of theirs who's already in the deal, who can't
Exactly.
who says there's no more room, you can't get in, and then that's the deal they want.
Yeah. Yeah. So look, knowing that, then you start saying, well, okay, I'm going to stop wasting my time spamming databases, and instead, how do I go about building real, meaningful connections and investments, and get those referrals from people that genuinely want to connect me to the right people?
Let's shift gears a little bit. This is another potentially transformative topic. It's AI, which everyone wants to talk about today. In fact, just today, your friend Daniel Priestley was featured on Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO podcast, discussing really the profound impact of AI agents. And during the podcast, Daniel described his experience of using AI for an M&A transaction, really using it from beginning to end, which he described as incredibly efficient and saved him at least $100,000, probably mostly in lawyer fees. But
Mhm.
given AI's rapidly advancing capabilities and in handling complex workflows, it can do data analysis, it can do outreach. How do you foresee this technology affecting really the art and science of building trusted investor networks? As AI automates more processes, really does the human element that Daniel also emphasized, do those skills of building deep trusted relationships and understanding human motivations, really do they become even more critical for successful connectors?
Yeah, I think so. I caught up with Dan in Texas a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about this because, yeah, I think we're both fairly aligned on this. I think there's there's a lot of talk about AI in the last couple of years, but the reality is we've all been using AI very, very efficiently for the last 20 years. We've been using it to give agency away. So Google uses AI very successfully to serve us up the best options when we search for something. YouTube gives us all these selections of what we should be watching next, and it's very, very good at it, as does Netflix, as does Spotify. um, and so we have become excellent users of AI to give choice away in return for saving time. When ChatGPT came out, really that was the first time AI had been put into the hands of us as consumers to actually use it with leverage. And I think what is going to be very interesting is that you're going to have a few people that become very, very good at creating a lot of agency using AI. So they get more and more powerful and more sophisticated, more and more ability to get stuff done. And the vast majority of people are just going to say, just take away choice, like just make my life easier. If it makes my life easier, I don't care. And that's fine as well. But I think for those of us that probably listening to a podcast like this, we want to be on the end that is delivering more value and being more efficient and getting more agency for it. I think the challenge that we have is that the technology is developing so fast that it's kind of difficult to even figure out where it's going to be 6 to 12 months from here. So Elon Musk reckons that within 5 years it'll be 1 million times as powerful. Now that's kind of hard to get our heads around. It's we can kind of get our heads around. Okay, it's twice as powerful as it was this time last year, but 1 million times as powerful. So one of the LinkedIn posts I asked a while ago was basically the prediction is that within 12 months from now, talking to AI will be like talking to someone with the entire globe's knowledge. So it's basically like talking to God. So the question is, what do you ask somebody that knows everything? Um, and for most of us, that question's just too overwhelming. Like, what? Yeah, what do you ask? Like, asking them how you make an extra $1,000 this month seems a little bit trivial. Asking them how you solve world peace might be too big. Like it's a little bit overwhelming, and so
Well, but you
um,
kind of have to separate out sort of the consciousness, sort of this concept of AGI, general intelligence versus this sort of knowledge base, all the data in the world. So there's this human aspect of being able to think autonomously, being able to have seemingly consciousness, and I think that's to some extent where the industry may be going. But then there's this huge volume of data that no one person could, retain or know
right,
everything.
yeah,
And you kind of have
yeah,
both. We're not at the consciousness level yet, but we're seeing so much progress that people are talking about it. And those,
yeah, and and I don't think. I mean, like, I don't think this is the forum for that conversation. But I think that
yeah. Well,
purely as a
but I think it is to the
purely as a
extent of trust, in terms of developing human relationships, and this idea of consciousness is really the part of the human to human connection. That you're dealing with
yeah.
a human as opposed to a machine.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of where I come back to this is the tech is developing so quickly, and trying to predict what industries are still going to be around in 5 years' time, what roles are still going to be around is very difficult. I think the things that will become more valuable are those human connections and those human experiences, and I think you can kind of see it being playing out in LinkedIn, like people do the generic AI driven content post, but it's just fluff. It's just kind of There's nothing to it. Whereas if somebody starts a post talking about, something that happened to them in childhood, or a very real experience that they've had, we resonate with that much more. And so I think that there is going to be a very large premium placed on the power of personal connections, and things that can't be replicated by AI anytime soon.
Makes sense. So let's bring it back to the human connection. One of the areas that you were very innovative was in developing this agglomeration model. And
Mhm.
one of the things that's unique about it, again, from this relationship building perspective, is that you created a model where you had multiple founders, multiple companies inside of a parent company. Um, and you had to develop a trusted relationship with each one and align the incentives of the business so that uh, all the entities would be uh, aligned. The interests of all the entities were aligned. It seemed to me that that model, what made it unique, was that you thought about it very deeply about how to build the relationships and how to be able to persuade entrepreneurs that the entity as a whole, the parent company's interests were aligned with the business owner's interests. How did you develop the trust? How did you get them, the founders, the entrepreneurs, the companies, to be comfortable with working with you in that kind of a context?
Yeah. So let me give some context to listeners. So the agglomeration model is basically we take a holdco public, and then we find owner operated businesses, typically old economy, 10, 20-year-old businesses, profitable, cash generating, in things like boring industries, accounting, transport, logistics, that sort of stuff. Those founders swap their private stock for public stock, but they carry on running the business. So, unlike private equity, we don't put in a 32-year-old with an MBA to tell them how to run their business. They carry on running the business the way they've always run it. And in effect, what happens is they become co-owners of a group of companies. So you have it's like a cooperative of small business owners that all have a vested interest in each other's success, but nobody can tell the other person how to run their business, and no one can tell you how to run your business. And so, look, that's one of those things that sounds fantastic on paper, and then you and then you realize that business owners are by definition bloody minded. Yeah, otherwise we wouldn't have got to where we are. And so putting a group of them together can be a little bit like herding stray cats. And so some of it we developed prior to launching the model 10 years ago, came out of the fact that we were small business owners. So it was like, what did we want? We wanted The reason we built the model was that small companies get unfairly penalized. It's very difficult. It's not a level playing field if you're a small company. You can't win big contracts because big companies won't give big contracts to small companies. You can't win the talent battle because you're competing against big companies with much bigger resources, and so small companies get stuck in this scale paradox. And so by putting them into a PLC, that solves that. So we started with trying to solve a problem that we faced as small business owners. We then had to say, okay, how do we get this aligned self interest? And again, it kind of started off with saying, well, all right, if we were going to try and exploit this system, how would we exploit it? And entrepreneurs by definition always like to push the lines and test the boundaries and things. So the way that we set the model up was every company is working on a perpetual earn-in model. So the more profit they contribute to the group, the more shares they earn. But then you realize that, okay, you could game that system a little bit. So you could put all of your expenses in one year, and so it goes down, and then you have a very profitable year and you get a bunch of bonus shares. So we introduced a high watermark. So you can't you, to get your bonus shares, you have to have reached a previous benchmark, and so a lot of it sort of evolved over time. And we had some very smart people. I think the nice thing about it was, like I said, we've done over 100 transactions. So over time in different groups, that's been 100 people thinking about this problem and thinking about, well, how do you solve this in the most equitable way? And yeah, look, I think I think it'll always be a work in progress. I mean, I started a few years ago. I started working on kind of a bunch of work looking at companies that survive hundreds of years, because in modern society, nobody talks about longevity of companies. Everything is about growth. So Wall Street is all about growth. Yeah, the longest Wall Street can think about is 90 days. Silicon Valley is all about growth. It's like, do one round, do a second round, do a third round, do an exit, like that. That's it. No, nobody's talking about, is this company still going to be here in 5 years' time, or 10 years' time, or 100 years' time? And so I started looking at, and this kind of ties back to the boardroom stuff. You start looking at governance. Why are some companies still here after hundreds of years? Why did some companies last 1,000 years and then suddenly disappear overnight? Like, what are the differences? And uh, so a lot of kind of what we built into the agglomeration model is really around taking those best practices of building for longevity rather than growth for the sake of growth, which is kind of counterintuitive in today's market. But we because we can do so many acquisitions, we get our growth very quickly through M&A, and then the focus on the internal governance of the company is much more sort of measured growth, which hopefully gives it longevity.
Well, that's a consistent theme, I think, in some of your comments is that you're looking at more of the long term view and the long term value. Is that also built into the trust relationship? Let me ask you this question about the agglomeration model. Do you think that people were trusting in the model itself as being self-perpetuating and working for everyone's best interests, and that the consensus would, 100 people working together would solve the problem? Or do you think they were trusting in you and the people who conceived of the model to lead them in the right direction?
So I think it's a combination of both. So they've got to believe that the model is going to work for them first of all, because when they first come into it, they don't care about everybody else in the group. They just want to know that they're going to be better off in the group. And so if they can see that they can win bigger contracts, if they can see that they can have some liquid stock as opposed to being completely illiquid as a small business, that they can be part of something bigger, that they can have smart people around them with a vested interest. All of those things are things that they're going to take from it, and so they have to be sold that that's going to be in their best interests. Um, Going back to the sort of concepts of progressive partnerships, which is all leveraging off, starting small and then leveraging off. The first deal is always the hardest deal to do. The second deal is much easier because you've already got one deal in. So when we've got 30 companies in the group, convincing another company to join the group is relatively easy. It's a So it sort of gets progressively easier because there is that default trust. Well, okay, if 30 other companies have already come in, the whole thing sort of builds momentum. And so, yeah, look, I think it has to be a combination of things, and it always has to start with solving the needs of the individual first, and then they can look at the bigger picture after that.
So you really pioneered this agglomeration model. Where do you think it is today? You had mentioned it's sort of always evolving. What are your current thoughts on the situations in which the agglomeration model would best fit?
So I think I mean, actually, if you look at the most successful investor of all time, he has an agglomeration model, which is Warren Buffett basically bought companies and said, just keep running them the way you've always run them. Like, I don't want to get involved. Like, wouldn't buy it unless it was a good company. And so we just did that, but we focused on much smaller companies. I think we built it very much from the bottom up to solve a problem for small businesses. And then some of the mistakes that we made, and I like to think we've made every possible mistake along the way, is we just sort of followed best practice for the capital markets. And what we discovered was the capital markets aren't actually particularly healthy for small businesses, micro caps, small caps. And the advice that the investment bankers give you is basically do what big companies do. So follow the best practice of an Apple and a Berkshire and a Meta and stuff. And that actually doesn't make sense. It's you should do that when you're a big company, but you're not a big company. So trying to play big company games when you're a small company is fatal. And so the biggest sort of jump in shift in understanding came after about 8 years of doing this, when we sat down and said, okay, let's do this, flip this on its head. So what we've done is we've built this from the small business up, and it's very, very successful. It helps small businesses grow. Now let's flip it from the point of view of an investor. If you were going to invest in a new public listing tomorrow, what would you want from that company that would make this an unbeatable investment for you? And basically, what we realized was that as an investor, you actually really don't care about the company, you care about the other investors. So you want more people to want to buy that stock than want to sell that stock. Really, that's all.
Okay, so my apologies. We seem to have lost connection there. We're back. We almost were ready to wrap up the interview, so we'll just ask you one more question. Thank you very much for our indulging with the technical issues. But Callum, I wanted to get your sense that really, given the market conditions, I think, particularly in 2025, really we're in an uncertain economic climate, geopolitical tensions. They're affecting business relationships between entrepreneurs, investors, acquirers. Is it making it harder to build trusted relationships? Or perhaps is it even more critical, to have that ability to bridge the gaps? What's your thoughts on where we are in the uncertainty?
Yeah, so look, I think there's always uncertainty. I think we all kind of have this idealized view that things were easier before, but yeah, whether it's COVID or terrorism or yeah, there's always something that we're Brexit, whatever. We're always lurching from one thing to another. I think for entrepreneurs, uncertainty creates value differentials, and value differentials is where we make our money. And so uncertainty on its own is not necessarily a bad thing. I think the what you want to be able to do is to capitalize on it as quickly as possible, and that's where trusted partnerships come in. So if people know that, if they know you and they trust you as someone that gets stuff done, then they will come to you when they have opportunities, and that's basically the heart of the whole idea. So yeah, look, I think we are in uncertain times, but I'm not expecting that to ever change. But I think surrounding yourself with good people that you can rely on to deliver means that you will always be in a position to profit from that uncertainty.
Well, this has been fantastic. Callum Laing, thank you so much for sharing your deep insights, particularly into developing strategic relationships and navigating the human side of business. Um, and I want to thank Ron Skelton for giving me the opportunity to host today's interview. With that, I hope to see you again. And for those who want to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn, just Roger Glovsky. So with that, thanks very much.